What attracted you to the story of Thaddeus Stevens? I mean, outside of the obvious that he clearly was ahead of his time, but what just made what's attracted you to his story to want to write this really powerful book?
Well, I grew up in the midst of the civil rights movement. I grew up in the 18 late, sometimes feels like the 1800s, the 1950s and 1960s. So this was always an issue close to my heart. When I began to study history, I found out about Stevens, especially from books by historians like W.E.B. Du Bois, who,
Today's his birthday. Today's his birthday. W.B. Du Bois.
mine too,
Oh, really? Seriously? Oh, how
seriously.
about that?
How
Oh,
about
happy
that?
birthday.
Must have been, thank you, must have been in the stars. Uh,
Exactly.
but I actually didn't know it was Du Bois's birthday.
Yeah, yeah.
So Du Bois is very close to to the hearts of all historians of the Civil War who value the destruction of slavery and who prize the role that the slaves themselves played in bringing
Hmm.
about the destruction of human bondage,
That's right.
which was really the subject of my last book, The Fall of the House of Dixie. Um, so I came to regard Stevens highly. He has been a lifelong hero of mine, somebody who fought this hard and in many ways this successfully for his cause, and somebody who, as we've noted, was ahead of people like Lincoln. Um, and most recently, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement has brought the subject of violence against African Americans on the part of representatives of the government, the police, back into a degree of public attention that it has woefully not received uh, more recently. So this subject of the rights of African Americans is squarely back in front of us. And I think learning about Thaddeus Stevens and learning what can be accomplished by being a determined fighter and not a compromiser on subjects like this can achieve.
Not a compromiser. I'm sitting here. I was watching Senator John Kennedy grilling Merrick Garland. I don't know if you saw this on what is systemic racism, what is implicit bias, and I'm just thinking this man needs a Thaddeus Stevens lesson. Like really, it's 2021. It's just so crazy to me as I'm watching this in 2021. It's
Well,
just
you know
bizarre.
the old saying that there are none so blind as those who will not see.
Hmm.
And I don't think somebody like uh, Kennedy needs a Thaddeus Stevens lesson. I think he needs a lobotomy because I don't
Good
think
point.
I don't think these questions are mysterious to him. He's simply against equality.
Exactly. Exactly. I have to ask you just a few hypothetical questions because you are the expert on Thaddeus Stevens. So I just want to know what you would think he would think. What do you think Thaddeus Stevens would think about Trump?
Well, he would, of course, he would hate Trump. He would see Trump for what he was, and would have seen him probably for what he was earlier than many others. He would have seen him as a would-be dictator. He would have seen him as a racist. He would have seen him as a boor. Uh, Everything that we think of concerning Trump, Thaddeus Stevens would have thought of and would have found excellent ways to ridicule and to rouse the country against him.
Hmm. And what do you think he would think of Mitch McConnell, Senator Mitch McConnell, former Senate Majority Leader?
I think he would have thought of him what he says at one point during the debate over I think it's the 13th Amendment. He's arguing against a member of the Democratic Party, which, as you and your viewers probably know, the two parties have virtually switched places
Yep.
politically since that time. So the Democrats are opposed to the 13th Amendment. And Stevens says to him, as he probably would say to Mitch McConnell, you may, if you wish, have inscribed on your tombstone the praise he stood consistently for the oppression of many for the benefit of the few. And I think those words would have applied to McConnell in Stevens' mouth as well.
And what do you think Thaddeus Stevens would have thought of President Barack Obama, who some say was a bit of a centrist? Some people say that. I don't know if I agree with that, but they say policy wise was a bit of a centrist.
Well, I think he was. I think he was. I remember, and so we're out of the subject of history, right? And now we're into the subject of recent history. But I remember thinking at the time when the health policy was being broached, and even before he runs into opposition to the idea of publicly run health insurance, Obama scales back the proposal, as has been said, negotiating with himself, it seemed, and cuts it back down to a proposal still based on the private insurance companies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's a policy of constant compromise and constant cutting down what you ask for. And I think that's completely antithetical to the approach that Stevens took. And I think, in fact, the whole era of before the Civil War, and Reconstruction shows that that kind of cautious, compromise oriented policy
Mm.
was not, as some have said, the cornerstone of democracy. It's a recipe for defeat. You say what
Compromise
you think
oriented.
needs to be done,
Mm.
and you let the chips fall where they may. You can't guarantee victory, but you need to say what the country needs. And that's the only way to educate the population and to
And isn't
build a
that what
move.
isn't that what Republicans do? They say we want it this way. We're not moving. We're not budging, and you better
Exactly.
deal with it or else. That's what
Exactly.
Republicans did.
Exactly. And to draw the historical parallel, Thaddeus Stevens, before the Civil War, is constantly saying on the floor of the House, I've got to say, to paraphrase him, I've got to say, you folks of the South, you've got a spine. I don't like at all what you stand for, but I wish we in the North fought as openly and consistently and energetically for our values as you do for yours.
Wow, that literally could be said. I've said that on these airwaves. I've literally said that I Republicans, they hustle, they get things done a certain kind of way. So absolutely. So what do you think? Again, we're just hypothetical, obviously. What do you think of Thaddeus Stevens? What do you think would be his advice to President Joe Biden?
Well, assuming Thaddeus Stevens would be in Biden's political party, I don't know what his political orientation would be today, what he would think was necessarily on the agenda today. But I think, assuming that he were a Democrat, he would say, fight. Say clearly what needs to be done. Don't seek constantly to be reaching across the aisle. Seek instead to educate the population about the necessity of your agenda and fight as hard as you can to get it passed. And if it doesn't pass now, keep fighting because that's the only way you're going to get it passed ever.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for this conversation. I think it's really important to know the history of Thaddeus Stevens. Another guy I love, John Brown. I love. Did John Brown are John Brown and Thaddeus? Are they the same time span at all? Do they ever meet?
Yes.
Have a drink?
No,
Anything?
no,
So-
no, no. They didn't. They didn't meet. And I think Stevens thought that this was tactically foolhardy. The same opinion that a number of other abolitionists, like Frederick Douglass, thought.
Mhm.
But he also admired, I think it's clear, what John Brown stood for. He wanted to publish a pamphlet after Brown's execution containing all the anti slavery things that Brown had said in captivity. And it was said of Stevens after Stevens' death by one of his colleagues that he carried the spirit of John Brown into government.
Mm.
And I like to think of it that way too.
One more quick question. I believe that people are just talking about white communities. I believe that white people are taught to be racist. They are programmed to be racist. just like men are programmed to be sexist. Like this is the propaganda that we have. You know, we still have the residue of the lost cause in our history, right?
Sure.
What can white folks do who may not have a lot of exposure to other black or brown folks? What can they do to push back against this propaganda and BS? Because I feel like sometimes when I'm on these airways, I get some phone calls. They're not listening to me. They think I'm some radical lefty commie, and I'm not. But what can white folks do who have been deeply affected by propaganda and BS to go more the Thaddeus Stevens route and less of the Trump route?
Well, I think, Mr. Crane, there are a couple of hopeful signs. The Black Lives Matter protests that we saw this year seem to me to contain a much larger proportion of
Very
whites
true.
than any civil rights movement I can ever remember. Certainly more, especially among young people, than
Yes.
was true of my generation in the 1960s. I was thrilled by this display of solidarity among young whites, um, not all, of course, but in large numbers, confronting police, uh, arm in arm with African Americans. I think things are getting better. And I think for those who still need to open their minds to this, perhaps exposure to the right books and the right movies and the right radio and TV shows, of which there are more now than there ever were in my youth, um, may help them along. I think history is on our side right
Mm-hmm.
now. And I hope the winds continue to blow in that direction.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, once again, the book, if you're watching this on my YouTube page, it's Thaddeus Stevens, Civil War Revolutionary, Fighter for Racial Justice by Bruce Levin. Thank you so much.